This is basics in Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign. We'll start out with creating new documents. In Illustrator, when you create a new document, file new, be sure that you know if it's for print or something else, let's say for screen, because if you choose print, it's gonna be using CMYK colors, and if you're gonna use create something for web, it would be using RGB colors. So be sure to choose the correct setting from the start. If this product has a multi-purpose, if it's going to be used both for web and for print, set it to be web. Then choose art and illustration or choose web, because that way we're using a much broader color spectrum. So if it has multi-purpose, or if it's for screen for that sake, then it would be totally ridiculous to make it in Smyk from the start. But if it has multi-purpose, then be sure that it's set for web or art and illustration instead of print. Okay, so when we create the document, then we just click create. Okay, so there is one more thing I would like to say inside of Illustrator, which is something that most of you do not know or accidentally do wrong. It is when you choose to place objects. So when we say file place, there are two different ways of placing. I'll just, go inside of a random folder and place something. When I find a picture, notice that in Illustrator you can specifically choose to link it or not link it. If Illustrator is set to link it, it will refer to when the picture is placed inside of your file, it will refer to some other place on your computer. So actually the file is not located inside of your Illustrator file. It will instead be referring to some other place on your computer. So you might see your picture inside of Illustrator, but actually it's just referring to somewhere else on your computer. And if you move that picture to a new location, Illustrator will complain that the file is missing. So a way of ensuring that that does not happen is to remove the link check mark. This way you will guarantee that the file is embedded and it will never again complain that the file could be missing even though you moved the original file, because there is an original file as a copy placed inside of the Illustrator file. Okay, so I'm just gonna place one of these random files right here. Whoops, here we go. There it is. So there are different ways to place in Illustrator. The most wrong way to do so, the wrong way to do so would be actually, instead of placing this inside of a new document that you just created, the wrong way to open this file would be to say file open, and then choosing the exact same file like this, boom. Let's just try that. Okay, it was not the same file, it doesn't matter. But you notice first of all that the picture is bigger than the artboard. I can just scale it down so it fits, not that huge a problem. But one thing you will notice as well is that the swatches are gone. You have no colors to select from. The symbols are gone, the brushes are gone. There's just a lot of things missing inside of Illustrator. And this happens because Illustrator gets confused as to which type of document this is, because you never created a new document. Instead, you just opened a Photoshop document inside of Illustrator. And you're not allowed to do that. That will create confusion inside of Illustrator. What you were supposed to do is like we just showed that I just showed in this one, that you actually made a new document with a specific purpose, for example, for print or for web or whatever, and then you placed your document. Okay, if you just remember to do this, create new document, and then place your images from Photoshop inside of Illustrator, you're one step ahead of everyone else. Yeah. Notice that you are of course allowed to open with file open Illustrator documents. My point here being you should not open Photoshop documents inside of Illustrator. You should place Photoshop documents inside of Illustrator. Because Photoshop document and what I refer to as Photoshop document is pixel documents. And they are not native language to Illustrator because Illustrator is a vector program, not a pixel program. So what I'm saying is never open JPEG files, PSD files, TIFF files, PNG files, and so on inside of Illustrator. Instead, be sure to place those type of files inside of an already existing Illustrator document. Okay, so inside of Photoshop, when you create a new document, often inside of Photoshop, you will not create new documents. You will instead work on photos that already exist. But you may be creating new documents. For example, if you're making an illustration. This could be the case for some illustrations. For others, it could be a sketch that you made in your hand, took a photo of it, and then worked on that sketch inside of Photoshop to progress. But let's say that you're actually creating an entirely new picture inside of Photoshop, an illustration that you're doing or something else. Well, then file new. When creating something new inside of Photoshop, you would have a different range to choose from. Let's say it's print. Well, then you would be able to write in inches. For example, if it was for, let's say, web, you would normally write in pixels and so on, but you can actually choose whichever unit you want the picture to be in from this tab right here. But how do you choose which size it is and what resolution it is? Well, in general, if you're doing something that's for an artwork, an illustration, well, you would have a high resolution because this would need to be printed and look good on print. But because you might be able to also use this on a web page because you want someone to see your beautiful artwork, well, then you would be working in RGB. So you both have the high standards for high quality print, but you have the high standard for colors as well that screen and web can provide, but print can't provide. So, okay, so what is 300 resolution in, let's say, 1000 times 1000 pixels? Well, that's quite easy. It's even easier if I type 900 times 900, because 900 pixels divided by a resolution of 300 pixels per inch, this is pixels per inch, right, is 3 inches, right? 900 divided by 300, that provides the result, 3 inches. 300 up. Okay, I'm done explaining that. So this picture would become a picture that is 3 inches times 3 inches in width and height. Okay, so is that big enough for something you want printed later on? Well, probably not, unless it's a fairly small picture, because 3 inches times 3 inches is, let me find the calculator, 3 times 2.54 is 7.62. So that means this image is 6.62 centimeters times 6.62 centimeters if it has this size. Okay, so in a resolution of 300, this picture will be 7.62 centimeters wide and 7.62 centimeters tall or high. So if you wanted 40 centimeters, you would actually just, it's simple math. If you want 40 centimeters, how much is that in inches? Well, okay, I'll just bring forth the calculator again, and I'll take 40 and divide that by 2.45, which is an inch, and that's 15 15.74, meaning that you would need 15.74 inches in order to get the measurement, let's just say it again, to get the measurement 40 centimeters. So this number right here is the amount of inches you would want there to be in your picture. So by saying 15.34 times 300, you would get the amount of pixels you want inside of your picture. So 4,724, I'm just gonna 4,740, was that the number? Will make 40 centimeters times 40 centimeters in a resolution of 300. Okay, so you're like, some of you are like wondering, okay, so if I need A0 size or A1 size, that's gonna be huge number in width and height. But one thing that's special about posters is that when you print on posters, it's expected that they are seen from far away. So it's natural that the resolution would only be 150 resolution for posters on billboards and so on. Actually, a lot of billboards are printed in a resolution of about 100 instead. So that means the number is then 3 times lower than 300, right? So that means that you need less dimensions in pixels. So if I want it in a resolution of 100, let's say something that is 1 meter times 1 meter, I would just actually be able to calculate that by using my calculator. Okay, so let's just round it up. Let's say 1 inch is 2.5 centimeters. Okay, so that means 4 inches is 10 centimeters, right? And so if I need to go all the way up to 1 meter, then that's 40 inches to have 1 meter. So if there's 100 pixels in 1 inch and I need 40 inches, that would mean 4,000 pixels, right? So in this size, I have 1 meter. 1 meter times 1 meter in a resolution of 100. If that does not make sense, then it's totally okay. You can actually just check it out by clicking create. And then you can go into image size, and you can see that this document is 1 meter times 1 meter. Let's get away from Photoshop. If you have questions about this, I'll try helping you in class, but it's actually just pure math, figuring out what size you need in Photoshop. And it's based on the amount of pixels that is within each inch. Okay, inside of InDesign, when we create a new document, we go to File, New Document, and here we decide, is it gonna be for web, is it gonna be for print, or is it gonna be something entirely different? Normally in InDesign it's for print, but sometimes we create for web. We could also create for mobile, whatever. But it's very important that you know which target you're targeting, what you're targeting. Is it for print or is it for web? Because InDesign will be referring to the file as if it's a SMUG file if you set it to print, and it will be referring to the file as if it's an RGB file if it's for web. Let's just say this is intended for print. Okay, so if you set it to be for print, then it's gonna ask you to be facing pages. This is for booklet, this is for magazines, and this is for a large number of different things which has 2 pages which face each other. Okay, I don't think I'll be using the facing pages for this document, so always remember to switch that off if you don't need it. It's best that you just set these standards correct before you create the document, because when you create the document, it will remember these standards inside of the master pages of the document. This is not a large problem. You can, but still it's just nice that your master pages have the same settings as you want them to have for the rest of the document. Okay, so the important things inside of InDesign is mainly the margins and the bleed and slug if you're working with print. So you would want the margins to be something specifically matching whatever document you're creating. So the text first starts, let's say, 13 millimeters inside of the document. Well, or it could be, let's say, 15 millimeters. That's where the text normally would start. The margins are normally defining for where the text starts. This does not necessarily mean that it's like that area all the time. You can use the margins as you prefer, but the margins are in general for your text frame. So, and you can set different settings here if you want, just to show you that it is possible. If you put a different left and right, that would be normal for having facing pages, because that would be outside and inside. But it's, yeah, I don't know what specific reason would suggest that you change left and right to not being the same. That would, you would know that best yourself. But you can set different settings and margins. It would be really weird if you set different bleed settings for top, left, bottom, and right. They would normally be the same, and they would normally be somewhere between 3 to 5 millimeters. And the bleed is color going across the edge of the paper, and that makes no sense, because why would there be any color across this edge of the paper? Well, that's because you normally print on bigger paper and you print more page than there actually is. And this is to prevent offset of paper when it's printed on both sides of the paper. When the paper comes through the printer and it switches page, well, then there's a small offset, meaning that the 2 pages are not entirely placed correctly on top of each other, meaning that there needs to be extra color going out to match that offset. So there's not going to be a white margin on the opposite side. So there's actually color on the opposite side when you crop it with the paper cutter. So that's what the bleed does. And you've probably heard this a million times. Just be sure that you remember to use the bleed. And also, when using the bleed, when exporting the document, when you export this document, what I often experience is that people, when they save this as a PDF, they forget to include either the printer's marks, or they forget to include the bleed edge. The bleed edge that I just set to 4 millimeters. That's really important if you're doing this for print and it's printed on both pages, both sides of the paper, that you remember to include the bleed edge. Remember to include this. And of course, also remember to include the crop marks, so you know where to cut, and so the whatever printer shop you're sending it to can set it to auto crop with the machine they're using. So that's just a reminder. Remember to switch on the bleed and the slug. and also, of course, the printer marks. And not necessarily all of these are relevant, but at least always remember to have the crop marks included. I'll just click cancel because I don't need to save this document. Okay, so if I ever need to change these margins that I set here, I can change them up in layout margins and columns, and here I can just set them to be, I'm just gonna set them all alike, so I'm just gonna set them to 20. Let's say 20, that's fine. Okay, so when I've set this specific setting, you might as well want to have some kind of grid that the document is using, so you can do that, make a grid inside. This is just a simple grid. Let's say you're working with thirds, you could go inside of layout, create guides, and you could just set them to create a number. I'm just going to switch on preview, set it to create a specific number of rows and a specific number of columns. And perhaps I don't want any gutter. I just want it to show me where 1/3 of the document is. Because this is actually the rule of thirds that I just created using this create guides. I could set it to be proportional to the page, or I could set it to be proportional to the margins. Then it's not the rule of thirds anymore, but then my inside of the margins would be proportionally set to be 1/3 each inside of the margin. So this is just a way of doing it. So I could also, if I wanted to create the golden ratio, if I wanted to use that, I could create 8s instead, and just 8s again, relevant to the page, and I'll just click OK, and then delete the two first lines right there, boom, and then the one in the middle, and then the one in the end. And that way I have actually, on here in the bottom, I've created 3/8 and 5/8, meaning that I have some of the proportions of the golden ratio. And I could do the same here, and this would be the fitting as well, boom, and there we have the golden ratio. So this is just my way of showing you how to actually create a quick grid inside of Illustrator, InDesign. I'm getting tired. It's 3:30. Okay, so let's say I was to use the thirds. I'll just create again 3 dividers, and I'll actually create it with a gutter this time. This gutter could be any size. I'll just make a huge gutter, 10 millimeters, and I'll perhaps set it to be start from the margins. Also notice you can set it to remove existing ruler guides, so if there was any ruler guides on this page, it would just delete them. And I'll click OK. Now, if I wanted to create some boxes inside of here as well, if I had some design where I would like, this could actually be picture boxes. So I'll just use the rectangle frame tool. If I wanted there to be boxes in all of these 9 areas, I could just drag my rectangle frame tool all the way down to the bottom and actually just click my up arrow to make some rectangles, some horizontal rectangles, and I could click my right arrow to create 9 rectangles. Now, if I wanted these to fit these guides right here, I would also be able to actually just hold down my command key, with the command key down and my right arrow, I can make the space bigger in between these boxes, And with my up arrow, I can adjust the spacing also. And you see, by doing so, I create boxes that fit these guides that I've created. And then I can just release my mouse button, and then I have 9 picture frames. So that's just a quick tip on how to produce a grid or produce some boxes for that grid, so you can quickly design something inside of Illustrator. And now you have a lot of flexibility to just create whatever you feel is proper inside of this design. Let's say I wanted a text box that goes from here to here. I'll just put it there. And instead of having an image, I'll fill it with text by just right-clicking and choosing for it to become text instead of being picture. So right-clicking, choosing content and setting it to text instead of graphic, and then I'll just, fill it with some placeholder text. And likewise, this could perhaps be, instead of being an image that's located right here, I could just drag this image frame right here and just set the content to be unassigned. Let's just say it's supposed to be some kind of color, and I'll just set it to be that color. And this way we have a very flexible layout that we can design and use within this grid. So we have a design that, seems proportional to each other and to the different elements inside of the design. One last thing. This is going to be something that some people might be thrilled about if they haven't seen it before. It's inside of Illustrator. If you want to take this picture and you want to make it into vector, you can actually do so by going into Window, Image Trace, and here you have the ability to produce a black and white result by just clicking preview. It will say this picture is too big, but you can still click OK and it will produce a result. This will look very bad unless you want this bitmap graphic effect of black and white. But you could also set it to do different things, grayscale for example, so it produces a grayscale result of the photo. And you can also set it to do full colors. And there's different ways of using this image trace depending on how detailed you want it to be. Here in advanced, you can actually adjust all of this path and corners and noise to produce exactly the result you want. You can actually make the Illustrator vector graphic seem as if it's a photo. Yeah. With that said, it means that having traced this inside of Illustrator, and by clicking expand up here, you trace it. By having done so, you actually made your photo into vector graphics, meaning you can scale it to any size without any damage being done to the picture. Notice though that it will look different because vector does not render pixels the same way that Photoshop does, because Photoshop actually handles pixels, whereas Illustrator tries to convert it into some kind of illustration in vector. So when you zoom in, you'll notice that there are changes in the picture which will not look like a photo. But still, it's worth mentioning that you can make your photos into vector graphics inside of Illustrator. Remember to click expand so it actually is interpreted as vector graphics. That's all for today. Thank you for listening. Yeah. Booyah.